Namaste friends, welcome back to the web technology video learning series. We have covered various aspects of JavaScript in our last 6 or 7 lessons. We have looked at JavaScript as a programming language for most of the lessons. In the last class, we have also covered how the JavaScript that we have developed can be linked to HTML, and more specifically how the JavaScript can change some parts of HTML, and how HTML can invoke a specific JavaScript function upon necessity. I hope you have been enjoying these lessons so far. Today we cover a very specific topic in JavaScript. This is one of the primary usages of JavaScript in HTML, which is data validation. In HTML, in one of the classes, we have talked about forms in in HTML. The forms are essentially meant to capture user input and then submit the data back to the user in a nice graphical way. HTML allows you to have different user interface widgets, as they call it, to capture user input. The problem with the forms standalone is there is not too much of restriction that can be placed in terms of making it valid. For example, some fields may be applicable only when some other field is set. Take the case of a form that requires a PAN card and income tax some number to be submitted as part of the form. These are applicable only if the person who is filling the form is actually a major. So they are conditional validity. There is conditional validity. Likewise, some fields may just be optional. If somebody doesn't have a PAN number, then they may not be able to fill the PAN number as part of the widget. Likewise, if somebody is not married, there is no way they can fill the husband name or spouse name and the children's name if they don't have children. These are some examples of some form fields which may not be applicable. There are other cases where you have, for example, age field. Somebody may fill an incorrect age field there. Maybe somebody may fill -3 in the age field, or somebody may fill 2020. Just they may have thought that this is their date of birth. These are incorrect values that are getting filled. HTML cannot by itself offer any mechanism to avoid people filling in incorrect values or illegal values. JavaScript helps in validating all the user entered data in the forms. It makes sure that the data is sane. In case there is a problem, it helps give any feedback back to the user so that user can fill the form, refill the form appropriately. It can even help identify the specific field that is causing the problem. All this is called form validation, or loosely, even more generally speaking, data validation. So this is where JavaScript plays a very important role in reading the data that the user has provided and validating and making sure that the data is sane. So that is what we're going to learn today. The validation has two parts of it. One is validating for completeness, and the second is validating for correctness. What is completeness? Completeness is that there is a set of fields which are required, some which are optional. So completeness makes sure that all required fields are filled and all permutations and combinations of the applicability and all those are addressed. Correctness means that the data that is populated is valid and is sane. For example, age field is not filled with an incorrect or invalid age, so on. We take a look at how to do some of this completeness and correctness validation using a simple form that is filled on the that is provided on the right hand side. It really only has three fields: a name, age, and a preferred vaccine center, whether it is Delhi or Noida or other. Let's look at the form, the HTML on the right hand side, and the presentation, which is the rendering on the left hand side. This is essentially only for reference. This is not something that we have, this is nothing to do with JavaScript. This is more the HTML that is getting covered here. So most of this you must have already learned as part of the HTML lesson. It is important. If there is some understanding that is still needed, then I recommend you go back to the forms lesson and then have a little bit of study about the forms and then come back to this video. The key things here are the ID fields, and the name fields. The form has a name and it has an on submit is equal to validate. So on submit is one of the events that we have learned in the last class. It is invoked, or this event is thrown when the form which has a submit button is clicked. When the submit button is clicked, if we have an onSubmit attribute set, then the particular validate function in this example is called. Now, where does the browser find the validate function? Because we have linked our validate.js as part of the using the script tag inside the HTML. So the expectation is that the validate function is part of the validate JavaScript. Okay. So key things here: the form has a name. Each field that is of importance to us has a name and an ID. Okay. And there is a submit button. When the button is submitted, the validate function is invoked. This is the simple form and the HTML. The first step is we have to read the data from the form. So the form is on the left hand side. This is the JavaScript on the right hand side that I am showing. We are reading the data that the user has entered in the name from the form. Look at how I am using the DOM API to be able to read the data. The document is the web document. In the forms, I am reading the form name in the first array parameter and the field name in the second parameter. And dot value gives me the value that user has filled. So the whatever user filled in the name text box will come to the name JavaScript variable in line number 5. Likewise, whatever data that user has filled in the age will come to the variable age in line number 6. The preferred vaccination center, which is a string again, will come from line number 7 into the variable pref. So this is how we read the form data. I just want to pay a little bit of attention to the age text box here, line number 15. This is not a simple text box. It is an input, which is a text box. But instead of type is equal to text, I am having type is equal to number, which means that this is a bit of control that HTML allows me to not enter any non-number into that widget. I am also saying it can be a minimum of 5 and maximum of 50. The default value shall be 20. So with this, I can put some restrictions on the what kind of data that user can enter. User cannot enter, for example, a letter or whatever, minus number, negative number or whatever into that number text box. So we understood how to read the form data within JavaScript. It's very simple. We have done that for these 3 fields, we have done it in 3 lines in JavaScript. The next is checking for the completeness. So for each field, we check if we have a valid name, whether user has filled anything, whether that field is, we believe all fields are required. So if we check if user has filled anything, and if user has not filled something, then we put an alert function to give user an indication that user has to do some more things in the form. Look at the checks for line number 10 and 22. Both of them are strings. So we are checking if the string is null, which means user has not entered anything, or we are also calling the trim function and checking against an empty string, which is essentially making sure that user not just somehow put the cursor and then just got away from that. These are both examples of user not filling the right set of data into the fields that are important to us. Why are we not doing that for line number 16? We are not using the trim function and we are not checking against empty string. The reason is, this is not a text box. This is a numbered text box because of the restriction that we already placed. Therefore, there is no need for us to check for the trim. And besides that, there is a default value there as well. So some additional bit of checking can be avoided in case we have requisite support from HTML. So in these lines between 9 and 25, we have checked the form for the completeness. Let's see how we do for correctness. Correctness, we check only two fields. One is the age field and the preferences. Correctness is essentially for checking the validity of the data. In our case, the age has to be above 18 and below 100. So that is one validity that we check. The second validity is, we cannot support any vaccination center. We can support only if it is Delhi or Noida. If user has selected other, then we have to alert the user that the selected center cannot be supported right now. So these two are the correctness that we are checking. You can argue saying that there can be more checks even for name. That is true. This example is only for illustrative purposes. In an ideal case, there will be lot more correctness checks and even completeness checks for even this simpler form. But this is essentially meant to illustrate how do we carry out the checks. Okay, so I hope you understood the checking for the correctness. So that's all. So once we do the completeness checks and correctness checks, we return true, as you can see on the right hand side, line number 39. So that essentially successfully sends the form data back to the server. So on the screen you have, on the left hand side we have the complete HTML listing, and on the right hand side we have the complete validate function. As I said, this is not intended to be the perfect validation or even complete validation. This is only meant to give some guidance in terms of what kind of validations and how some of the validations can be done. I hope you understood the concept of data validation, and you will be in a position to apply this knowledge to your own forms and adding JavaScript code for more data validation. Hope you enjoyed this lesson. Until our next lesson, thank you.